Here. life will never be the same. meetup of iOS developers or Mac developers sometimes as well. We also have a few hidden Android and Flutter developers, I heard. That's fine, that's fine.
We don't stone them.
Well, what's good is that we're part of the international CocoaHeads meetups, and that's why some of you are also here, because they know us from different countries, because they have groups like this everywhere in the world. Of course, we couldn't do this without our sponsors. Oh, great. I followed Dan's example and took off my jacket because it's getting too warm. But if you would like to get a sweater, do it in our shop. Marco is going very fast. We have a few JetBrains licenses we can raffle. I hope Marco will start the raffle on Slack. No? Oh, well, maybe if you have any interest, then please give me your name and we'll draw 6 names because we have 6 licenses to give away. Next slide. Thanks, Axel. And of course, a special thanks for today's sponsor and for Roeland giving a little speech about Pinch. Glad that we can be here. Unfortunately, we thought we had only one speaker for today, so Dan felt pressure as well. He's going to talk about screenshot testing in a multi-brand app. But very, very, very last minute, we got Tom. He offered to talk to us a little bit about Xcode plugins, which he was working on, experimenting a little bit with. So cool. Very nice. So we'll start with Dan, and then we'll take a little break, and then after that we'll do Tom's talk. I'm not sure. Oh yeah, well, if anyone else ever wants to give a presentation, then please let us know, because we're always looking for people who want to tell something about iOS, Mac, can also be Flutter, Android, Kotlin. Or if you know a nice tool that you've used that really helped or whatever, then please let us know and overcome your fears like me.
When are you going to give a talk?
Never. I think this was it, toch, Marco?
Drinks next time.
Oh yeah. For in December we always organize a social event and do some drinks together, and skip the professional stuff and then just have fun. But tonight we're going to have fun with Dan. I would say take it away.
At Bench, and I am working on an app that is multi-branded, and that is why we decided to implement screenshot testing. So when we're not busy implementing tracking libraries and ad libraries, I think everybody that works on news apps is familiar with that, we are developing all sorts of new UI elements, and the entire app has right now 5 brands, with all sorts of different elements that are reused across all brands, or at least are available to all brands. But they all have different fonts, different colors, some styling elements like separators and stuff like that. And a lot of them have different constraints because they want their margins to be like 5 pixels more or less. So as you can imagine, when working on one brand, there's always a large chance of breaking something for another brand. So to very quickly or simply explain it, let's say you're working on this little title element and you decide to possibly increase the font size. And then you run our snapshot tests, and as you can see in the background, there's a lot of red because it had some unintended side effects. Because apparently the image is related to the height of the title block, and now it's all not very pretty anymore. But it gives you a failed image, and most importantly, a diffed image where you can really easily see what you messed up and if you want to fix it or not. This also applies to all our assets. We get all our assets from a separate team in a library. So we have control of updating the pod that contains the library, but we don't really have control over its contents. And there have been cases where aspect ratios changed in images, or they were removed entirely or substituted out for blank images because they were deprecated. And this is again a solution where the screenshot testing really saved our bacon. And this is a bit more of a the example we come across a lot. So I'm working on this title element, and it needs to be constrained to a set height, but it's still fine, and it was fine for all the other brands I used whilst testing the app. But then there was one brand that has the same font size, same font strength, but a higher line height. And then it gets clipped. But luckily, screenshot tests to the rescue. We get a few red lines, and we know what to fix. We don't test for accessibility, because they didn't implement accessibility in the app we're currently working on. Don't shoot the messenger. I've brought it up, but they're like, oh, well. And all the content is dynamic, so we don't really have to worry about multiple languages. It's one thing we don't have to worry about. Our building blocks are mostly nimble snapshots, which is a library that uses iOS snapshot test case, which was originally made by Facebook and now is maintained by Uber, I believe. And then we integrate that with Bitrise, so during the builds, we can see in our Bitrise log what went wrong. And you can also download a XC test report, and then you can see the screenshots in Xcode, which is quite useful. So in our app, we use a coordinator pattern, but for testing, we have a test coordinator. It uses our production data models with mock data. We use a mock view model because there's a bunch of surfaces that have never been mocked. And then we use in this case, the production article detail view. And this all lives in our main app target. This is how a spec looks like. So we have the coordinator here, and it spits out, in this case, a list teaser based on a few parameters. But the cool thing about having it live in the main app target is that on the left, we have our Figma file. And on the right, this is just the app loaded with mock data. And we can basically have the Figma file next to it. And whenever we're onboarding a new brand, we usually start with assets from another brand. And you can start switching out stuff and going through pages, seeing what's not right yet, instead of having to go to test articles, which was the original setup when I got here. So now you just have it all on one page, and that makes it a lot quicker to onboard all new brands because all the fonts are different, colors are different, icons are sometimes different. We've also integrated it in our CI/CD system. So whenever there's a merge request, we run a pipeline just for one brand because the pipeline runs for every merge request, and otherwise you would be waiting on pipeline for quite a while. And we have nightly alpha builds, which run for all brands. So we do run the tests based off of the develop branch every night. And in that way, there's usually where we see our errors, when it all comes together. It's like, feature X doesn't always break, but feature X and Y quite often results in shenanigans. And in the morning, we see in our Slack something went wrong, which is quite useful. There are some cons to this setup. Our Bitrise builds take an insanely long time because we've covered basically almost every single element in almost every state. And all the screenshots are in isolation instead of like in overview pages. So I think a normal build takes roughly, with just a unit test, take between 10 and 15 minutes. This takes 45-ish minutes per brand. So we're going to reach a point where we've onboarded too many brands, and like it will be an infinite cycle of waiting on Bitrise builds to continue. So yeah, keep that in mind if you pay for your CI/CD. There's also, whenever you change iOS versions, you basically need to re-render all the screenshots. Also, when you update Xcode versions, you need to re-render all the screenshots. Yet, x86 to Apple Silicon seems to be completely fine. We've never encountered any problems there, which is nice. But yeah, there is a lot of manual labor, factory labor involved. We need to re-render all the screenshots. And most importantly, whenever you change an iOS version, you do sort of have to step through all of them to see if nothing really changed. You can set a tolerance, but then you wouldn't be entirely sure if your tolerance is masking stuff, and then it can always drift further and further. So yeah, I did write a quick shell script that loops over all our targets and builds it all locally so you can quickly re-render all your test screenshots. So that's pretty nice. I also have a short demo. There's my, oops. Just full screen it. Yeah, so this is a really simple demo app that I wrote. It's basically just a label. And right now, this one test succeeds. But if you were to, for example, change the font size and run the tests. I also made a demo app so you didn't have to wait for like 10 minutes while our regular app built. Testing. And you see the one snapshot test that exists in this app fails. And if we jump to the report, you can see the reference image, and you see the failed image where it's still relatively easy to see what went wrong, and my favorite one, the deft image, where you can really easily see if it's, how bad it is. And then based on that information, you can either decide to re-render the snapshot and as a new reference, or you can decide to fix your mistake. Yeah. Are there any questions?
How do you re-render?
Who asked that? Yeah, there. No, you basically just on the record screenshot thing, you pass through, that you can set a Boolean there, you pass through. And then it, re-renders.
Store it somewhere, I guess.
Yeah, you can set the destination. We keep it all in our repo. We do use Git LFS for it. But we all keep the reference images in our repository. So you have to re-render them locally. You don't re-render them on the CI/CD system because that would, again, take a long time. So yeah, that's basically how it works.
So I kind of noticed that your screenshots were all full screen. Was that a screenshot test for a single component or for a whole view?
We do it mostly for single components.
And when you do it for single components, is it a screenshot of a whole simulator and a component embedded within that?
Yes.
Or is it just the component standalone?
No, it is. It basically takes a screenshot of the view as it is rendered out, and we center the component in a collection view. I mean, you can make it with multiple components. We have a few edge cases for them. There's like 3 or 4 title variations, and then we just put them all below each other.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
That was also one of my questions, because I was also wondering, do you only snapshot view components, or do you snapshot entire views?
Well,
Like
no,
attach
yeah.
views?
So you could either build a view based on mock data to make your snapshots more efficient, but yeah, originally the setup was to test every component individually, and you can also test views as long as you have any way of loading them in isolation with mock data. Then you can test whatever view you want.
Yeah, we were doing the same thing, and we were also running into the fact that it would take a long time for the test to finish, and so that's why I was wondering if you guys had a strategy to watch your snapshot to watch your snapshot testing. But okay.
Luckily, the media house is willing to pay for the bitrise setup. Yeah.
So you introduced this after the app was live, right?
Bart actually introduced it originally, but yeah.
Yeah. So how did you go about that? So you have an app, it's not optimized to maybe even render one view, etc.
It wasn't, no.
So can you tell a little bit about?
Luckily, quite a few pages already had like at least a view model, which gives you a way of injecting dummy data and rendering your views in isolation. But yeah, a lot of elements were not mocked. So yeah, we basically started writing a protocol around the view model to be able to mock it, and pulling as many singletons out of the view controller and putting them in the view model.
So how long did it take to go from 0 to 1, basically, from no?
From 0 to 1 wasn't that hard, because like a lot of the single components were already would have like a configure function where you pass in the data or the data model. But for bigger views, it took a long time because the view models were not optimized to be mocked at all.
And how did you decide where to start?
I think we started on a grid, some grid elements, because they simply were the easiest to start with.
Okay.
That was, yeah. I mean, we started with the path of least resistance and the views that you see the most as the end user,
Yeah, exactly.
because those are the most valuable, essentially.
Nice.
The example you gave of the new brands with a higher line height.
Yeah.
So that's not something you find with this, right?
It is, yeah. When you run the screenshot tests on that new brand, and you see that it clips.
Yeah, but there's
Oh, you mean if they haven't been rendered yet? No.
there's no reference yet.
No, if there's no reference, you don't find it.
So when you start with a new brand, you need to create reference images, and someone has to
Yeah.
compare them to the Figma
But that is
files.
also why I made the overview pages. So you
Right.
could easily have it next to your Figma file. I mean, of course, the Figma file also has weird stuff in it usually, which doesn't make sense, but for a developer. But yeah, you have to start with just manual labor.
Yeah, so the reference image part is the really labor-intensive part.
Yeah.
Creating those, making sure they're really correct.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. Luckily, we also have a very good QA team. I mean, there's still no substitute for good QA. So they also catch a lot of stuff.
Hello.
Hello.
This style of screenshot testing is literally taking a screenshot and comparing it to another with a diff.
Yes,
And
I think it uses KSDiff under the hood.
oh, okay, so is that looking at the sort of XML of the views and comparing constraints?
No.
Okay.
It literally looks at screenshots. So it's
just looking at
completely
screenshots.
agnostic of what is happening behind the scenes.
Okay, so does that mean that if you, rather than like something fairly obvious to the human eye, like font size, it was font color, and there was one that was black, and then one that was slightly darker black?
That fails, yeah.
It fails, but is it easy to determine what caused it, or do you really have to sort of dig in?
Yeah, well, at some point you would have to, like, if they are the exact same size, the diff is really hard to see. There are other image comparison tools, but then you would really have to dig them out of the folder where they are generated, and you wouldn't use the XC test report if you really are. I've seen like situations where between iOS 12 and 13, like there was a sub-pixel difference in font rendering.
Yeah. And do you find that you have to run it on lots of different devices to be able to, different device sizes and categories, and
You could.
introduce new ones every year?
Yeah, unfortunately, we only run it on one device, but in an ideal world, you would run it on multiple devices.
Okay, because I think there are screenshot testing libraries that, rather than doing they have images to show you as well to make
Yeah.
it pretty, but I think they check the XML of like, so you can see auto layout constraints. So I think it's sort of device agnostic and size agnostic.
Yeah. Well, even there are like third-party outside-in plugins, which I don't remember what they are, but for automated testing, they also do constant comparison, and Xcode also has their own
Okay.
UI, Xcode,
yeah,
XC UI tests.
True, they do. Yeah.
You can use those as well. And they are, you would easily be able to use a different subset of devices, and you wouldn't have to re-render it every time. But it also could hide mistakes that seem logical to a computer. Like if the string is still there, but it's capped weirdly, or you didn't expect it to be on 2 lines.
I also think for the XML.
We have a process, Omar.
Okay, there we go. So for this XML-based constraint checking, I think that's really dangerous because sometimes I actually want to refactor a view. For example, I want to, instead of have this view be in this view, be in another view, but I actually still want the snapshot test to pass, meaning I did the same exact thing, right? So actually, I think doing it agnostic to the constraints, but more of what's there visually, what's actually seen, has a lot of advantages, even if speed is, there for
Ideally, you
XML.
combine the both. I mean, if you really want to. We also have automated user interaction tests running nightly, but I don't run those.
Yeah.
Those are like an outside-in thing. I'm not even entirely sure what it's called. Catalan, I think.
And since I'm holding the box, I just want to ask. Isn't it true that failures take much longer than successes in the snapshot test?
Yes, because it retries it a couple of times, because it is, in fact, an imperfect system. So
And it also needs to render the diff also as a result.
yes,
Yeah.
and it needs to save it somewhere. Like the successes are immediately deleted. But I mean, longer. Yeah, no, it takes longer.
Right. So
But you would run them locally usually before you push.
And is this 45 minutes like the happy path when there's no failures, or is when it
Well,
like
I think it's between 40 and 45. It also depends on how many tests fail. If you have like, if 80% of the tests fail, it would take a very long time for it to complete. If like 2 or 3 fail, it's super close to your happy path.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So how many UI tests do you do?
I would have to check, but it is, I think, 203 or something like that, from the top of my head. And every time we're adding more. Whenever a state of the objective, I mean, the app has been around for a long time. There are components that have states that I've never seen. And sometimes they are used very sporadically. And when we see it go wrong, we write another run.
So that means that with 5 brands, and ideally 1 or 2 phones that you test every year, you have to update thousands of tests. Can't you automate that?
It is automated.
Okay, because you said if a test fails, you have to add that file to the reference directory. I would sort of say, create reference build.
No, that's how it works. You have like one mother of all Boolean. If you set that to true, it essentially re-renders all the images. But even GitHub and most Git repositories are smart enough to see if an image is exactly the same. It wouldn't see it as a new image. So you don't see it in your diff. So you only see the actually changed images in your diff. Cool. So that makes it easy to step through. And and I wrote a script that loops over all the brands and re-renders all the images. Thank you.
Hey, I was wondering, is there any pain points when you're supporting screenshot testing for localizations, or for example, you're supporting 3 different languages?
Well, we don't have any localization differences. It is they are all Belgian apps, and they're only run in Flemish, I guess. You would have to redo all your tests for every localization if you have non-dynamic content. I mean, all the content in our app is essentially dynamic, so everything can be any string, so we don't test for different localizations. But yeah, you would 205 tests for what would be for one language, so you would essentially have 205 more for any other language. And you would also have to re-render those. And I'm sure your builds would take much longer then. At that point, it might make sense to start combining it all into a view, and that way you can make smaller snapshot tests, which are slightly less flexible.
All right, thank you.
Hi. Do you use that for Swift UI apps or mostly for UI UI?
Sorry, what did you say?
Do you use that for Swift UI views or
this is all UIKit.
UIKit.
Yeah, because up until very recently we had to support iOS 12.
So yeah, but that Facebook library is quite old, right? Are there anything like more suitable for Swift UI, or is it the same?
I don't think there's a reason you couldn't use it for Swift UI. I mean, as long as you have the ability to launch a view in isolation, you can run a snapshot test over it.
Yeah, but I thought that the Swift UI is more declarative, so I thought that there may be more like comparing the code base itself would be enough for Swift UI, maybe.
Yes, that's actually, I've never thought, I mean, I don't use Swift UI a lot in production because iOS 12, but that would be interesting, but you would run into the same problems as XCUI tests where something will look fine in code and still, I mean, even UIKit and still behaves in weird and unexpected ways sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, that might be a way to do it a bit quicker. And also you already write your Swift UI views in a way that it's easier to inject data into them, so.
Okay.
Hello. Does your Android team also run UI snapshot test?
What did you say?
Android
Android
the
team.
Android team.
There was a talk here about snapshot testing for Android a little while ago. They were written for Android. The problem is there's weird differences between computers. It's like going from Apple Silicon to x86 Macs. There are imperceivable differences between the snapshot tests. So you would have to always render them on your dedicated CI/CD setup if you want like one single source of truth. And I believe there were some other gotchas, but the Dutch Android user group, I don't know if they record their talks, but they had a talk on it a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, thank you.
Presentation.
Thank
I
you.
think we've learned a lot. Let's have a little break
Yeah.
before we.
And I put the tiny demo app on my GitHub, and it's literally the only thing on my GitHub, so it's really easy to find. The only public thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, emotional support. I heard that we're live again, so with this, I want to thank Tom for doing a very impromptu presentation for us. He worked on Xcode plugins a little while back, and he wants to share his experience with us. So it's a new thing. I haven't tried it out yet either, so, and I don't know about you guys. No. So it's all very new, so that's nice. Thank you for introducing it to us.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so I decided to do the talk an hour ago. So it's not very prepared, but it's hope to can do something interactive. If you have questions, just shout them out. So I want to talk about Swift Package Manager plugins, which is something new, I think, in the latest Xcode version since WWDC. And for the last month or so, I've been working on adding them to RSwift. So that's what I want to show you, what I've been doing. And hopefully you can use something like this in your projects as well. Let me start by explaining what r.swift is. r.swift is a tool that generates static references to resources. So that helps during development. For example, this is a demo project. Here I have a assets catalog with images and colors, and I have a strings file with some strings, and I can use them, refresh, use them over here. So for example, instead of writing out the string CocoaHeads here, this is a reference to the string in that file, and also a reference here to the image, as well as to the color. And then I can change it, for example, and this is where it's useful, if I decide to delete this image, or somebody else decides to delete the image, now the project build should no longer compile. Build failure, yes, the image isn't available. So this, instead of rendering a blank image, it now gives a build error. So I can change it to some other image. It auto-completes because it's generated. Let's change it to this. Refresh. New image. If I want to use a different string, here there's a string called hello, which has an argument. I can do that as well, so I can say hello. I can either call it like this, which should work, yes, or I can do it like this, heads, which should, yes, also works. So that is basically what r.swift does and how it works. And as you saw, each time I build this, this gets updated and works again. So if I remove an image or add an image, this generated thing changes. So let me show you how to add it to, if you have an Xcode project which doesn't have RSwift yet, how you can add it, because that has changed since the latest version, which isn't released yet. I'm working on a new version which adds support for Swift Package Manager plugins. So the way you can add it to your project is to go to your project settings here, go to package dependencies, add a new Swift package dependency. Normally you would use a version, but this isn't released yet, so I'm using a branch, refactor. And I add it to my project. And as you can see, this is a Swift package which has two things, an executable and a library. And in this case, I want to use the library inside my app target. And here it's downloaded the package and all its dependencies. And now if I want to use it in this project, let me first build this project, which should fail right now, in theory. Well, it should have failed. It's a cached result, but I can clean it, and then, but now it's slow. Yeah. So this project also uses our, in this case, a storyboard, but it doesn't work because it doesn't know about it. To add a build tool plugin, you go to your targets, go to build phases, and this is new in the latest Xcode version. Now it says run build tool plugins, this section, and here you can add one of the plugins that's in scope of your project. And in this case, my only dependency is rswift, and it ships with 2 build tool plugins, rswift generate internal resources or rswift generate public resources. I want this one. And now it's added it as a build tool over here. Let me double check something, yeah. And now I should be able to build the project, which is now slow because I cleaned everything. And it succeeds, yeah. So this is how you would add it to an Xcode project. And now you can well, use all the rswift tools. So this is how you could use it as a user. There's one other type of project, which is this project, which is a Swift package manager project. Let me close this. So if you have, you can build, instead of using an Xcode project file, you can also have a project that's only built using a Swift package, like package.swift. You can open that, and that's this project. So this one also uses the rswift as a dependency, and that's configured not in Xcode because there's no Xcode settings, but in here. So this project has a library and an executable, and it has one dependency, which is in this case my local version of rswift because I'm using it for development. And then in one of your targets, you can say, I want to use the rswift library as a dependency, which is the same thing I did in Xcode when I added the project. I said I wanted to use the library as a dependency. And then this plugin is used, which is the same thing I did in Xcode as well. Through the UI, now I'm doing it here, saying I want to use this plugin. And that means that now when I build this project, the way this works is, this is my build log, and it's, is that the correct one? No, I want to build the library. Oh, that was this one. The very first thing it does before building anything else is build all the plugins it needs, because otherwise it can't do the rest of the build. So it builds my plugin. To build that, it needs to build all my dependencies. So these are all part of rswift. rswift depends on Swift argument parser, so that's built here. But after that's built, it can then, as part of the build process of building the library, my test library, which is the one I'm building, it runs the custom script here. So that is the step where it's actually running rswift. And then after that, that has generated the our generated Swift file, and now it can compile that. So if you go click on one of these things, this is a generated file that was generated by the rswift tool, and this file is localized in your derived data. So whenever you build something using a Swift package manager plugin and it generates files, those are placed in the derived data directory. So actually when I clean it, this should disappear. I think this file no longer exists now. Yeah, no, I can't find the file, so I need to build it again. And now this file with all the generated code exists again. So that's basically the way it all works. How you can build something like this. And if you have any questions, shout them out. This is the source code of rswift. which I can see because I'm using a local version here. R Swift has 6 products, an executable and a library. Those were the 2 things that popped up in the Xcode UI when I added the package. And it also has 4 plugins. So R Swift has these targets, which are library targets, some test targets, an executable, and also plugins. So this is the thing that is new. In the latest version, you can define plugins, and you can define 2 types of plugins. Either it's a build tool, which is something that is run during the build process, or it's a command tool, which is a command you can invoke manually. So depending on what type of thing you want, you can either run it during builds, which is great for code generation, like R Swift. But if you have something you need to do manually, like code formatting or something, or linting, you may want to run that during the build as well. But if you want to do it manually, you can do it as well. So R Swift has 2 versions. You can either do it during the build, which is the one I've been using, but you can also right-click and say these 2 are provided by R Swift, generate resources command, and run it manually if you want to do that. So in this case, I want to run R Swift on, let's see, these 2 targets. I can provide any additional arguments I want and say run. And now I get a warning from Xcode that I'm running custom code, which came from the internet. This is you can say don't ask again, or what you should do is show command and read all the code to make sure it's all safe. Yeah. Or you can just say always run. In the case if you're running this on Bitrise, because the first time you run it in Xcode, it also does the pop-up if you run it through Xcode in the build process. If you run it on Bitrise or something like that, you need to pass in an argument saying it's safe to run this, because I mean it could do things. In this now I'm running it manually. Allow command to change files because it's changing files. And this manually run version generated the file over here. So if you want to check in the file, you can do that as well. So those are the 2 flavors of package manager plugins, either a build tool or a custom command. In this case, I prefer the build tool because I don't want to run it manually each time I change something. But if you want to check in a file, this is a more useful version. If you want to build, do this as well, make plugins that are used in Xcode or in Swift Package Manager only projects. Well, this is the way you do it. You define them over here, and then in your project has sources, which are the libraries you have. You have tests, but now you also have plugins, and this is an example of a plugin. This plugin comes in 2 flavors. It is a build tool plugin, and it's also an Xcode build tool plugin, because the build tool plugin is the one that's used in a Swift Package Manager only package. But if you have Xcode, then you have some more things, so that's a second version of the same plugin. And the things you can do in this code is very limited, because you can basically only import foundation and nothing else. So what I do here is create a directory where I can put my, my output file. I get in here the target, which is the target I'm trying to build, and I use that to get all the source files, because the way R Swift works, it looks at all your source files and figures out what all the things are it needs to generate. So in this case, I need access to all the source files. I filter out only things I'm interested in, and then I generate here a build command. And this is the thing that you see in the build log. This is the thing that's run at some point during your build. And here you see the name R Swift generate resources for, which is the name that showed up somewhere here. Run custom shell command rswift generate resources for generic module my test library. Yeah, so you can, so this build command has a name and it uses an executable. In this case, it uses the executable rswift, which is from this package, and it's listed here as a dependency. So as I said, you can run very few code in there because you can only access foundation, but you can depend on an executable, which I do here. And therefore I can do all the things I need to do from inside this executable. Yeah, and that's it, I think. Yeah. Any questions on that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead.
So first, a general question, remind me, can you now use resources in a Swift package?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes.
So I'm guessing that, you mentioned that there's two things it builds, the Xcode build tool plugin and the non-Xcode one. So there's the first one, I know you technically explained this, but I'm just trying to understand it. So does the first one work on packages that you're developing here? So if you wanted to create like a Swift UI view in a package and it had resources, this would...
Yeah, so that is this example basically. This is a Swift UI package.
Oh, so I thought that was in a...
Yeah, this is not an Xcode project. This is a pure Swift package thing, in this case using Swift UI, which has an image. You can have a directory resources with images and fonts and stuff.
And will it work for any? Will it work for any sources or any products and libraries, so long as you're including it, or does it struggle to work on more than just one? It'll generate, like it has to generate a. Has to generate the.
You mean if there are multiple assets?
Yes, there we go.
You mean rswift, the tool?
Yes.
Yes, it generates a separate file for each target.
Yeah.
So and then you can use it from within the target.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I'm realizing I'm mixing up your talk on
yes.
Swift plugins and.
I showed two different things, but yes, our Swift works for each target, and as well as the build tool, if you gets invoked on a specific target. So if you're building two targets, then it gets invoked twice for each target.
So I can remember indeed that rswift, it was run as a build script, and then it would generate the file.
Yes, so that's the previous version. Before this, you had to manually invoke the build script, and now this is basically the build script.
So now the build command is inside this Swift package manager library. So you don't have to run the command from a shell script anymore.
Yes, so the previous version, the way it worked, you would here manually create a run script and then write out all the same stuff that is now done here.
Okay, thanks. It's clear, because it was also unclear to me. It's like you still, because you said you still have to run the script. It's like, oh, but what's the difference then? So now it's different. Yeah. And my second question, which is more of a marketing question, what's the difference? What are the advantages of rswift above SwiftGen, which is basically the same thing?
I think the main advantage is that SwiftGen didn't exist when we started. So Matthijs and I worked on rswift together.
And rswift is more. rswift is more opinionated. I think SwiftGen, so SwiftGen gives you a lot of options to customize, and rswift don't.
Oh, okay.
So what I think still is unique to rswift is that it really reads your Xcode project, so you don't have to tell it yourself like, oh, here's an asset catalog and here's a storyboard that you have to process. rswift looks at the Xcode file figures out what it depends on, etc., and then generates the right resources.
This directory.
Yeah.
Look at all the Swift files.
And in complex projects, if you do white label, etc., then when you build an Xcode project that excludes for one white label version a certain asset catalog, then R.Swift will actually not generate that
because it
resources.
Targets.
Exactly.
Swift.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a good.
So it really understands your project.
Especially for this company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So the previous version before the Swift package manager thing, you pointed at an Xcode project and it scans the project and figures out the target. And now this version basically does the same thing, but now using Swift package manager, you get the targets.
Yeah, what's pretty cool about this Swift package manager support for build tools is that we always abused CocoaPods, for example. CocoaPods only to add a library to your project and then use the code inside your own project. And R.Swift isn't really code, it's a code generator like SwiftLint or a Swift formatter. It's more like a tool like that. So it was always a bit of a abusive way of using a hack, a hack of using CocoaPods, and now it's really supported by Swift Package Manager in a native way, and Xcode really understands that it's running a build tool and has this security stuff, like, okay, you're going to run code from the internet, and instead of CocoaPods just running random code without warning you. So that's pretty nice.
So I just kind of want to know what's like the main, or rather, what can these plugins actually do? Because R.Swift seems to me like, yeah, it could just be a build phase script. Like it could have always been. It didn't need to be a plugin whatsoever. So in that vein, like what do plugins really add?
So a build tool plugin is basically the same as a script, but now instead of writing a script in Bash, you write it in Swift, and you can ship it as a part of a library. So instead of telling a user copy this Bash script in your run, now you can write it yourself. Like this isn't a lot of code, but I mean it is some code, and this is shipped as a library someone can reuse.
Right, and yeah, and no need to configure the build phase scripts, etc. That's really handy for sure. But like, I'm just wondering, like, what other plugins have you seen in general? Like, what can plugins do? Like, what are the
basics examples are code generation and like linting things. But I mean that already can be a lot of stuff because code generation. Well, because it's now all Swift, it's a lot easier to write a simple code generation for a little file you might have, configuration file. So that I think that is the main example, especially for the build phase one. And the generate one, you can do a lot more stuff, like format my code, whatever you can imagine stuff you want to run as a command on your Xcode project. The WDC talk is also a great introduction on this.
Yeah.
But I think it lists those two examples.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. This is actually the first time I've ever even heard of Xcode plugins today. So it's nice to know that it exists.
Yeah, so I wanted to add, I think another use case could be for a project could be if you have a certain folder structure with template files for a new feature, then you could create a right-click thing, create new thing, and it creates a folder with and then an argument could be the name of the feature. So you scaffold basically a new folder, for example. That could also be a thing you do. So basically, that I think a lot of repetitive work that you do in a project could be automated by tools and plugins like this. But that's the interesting thing, right? Now you know it exists, so now you can think of where
this kind of stuff has existed for years, of course. Every environment has code generations and things, but now that it's in Swift, it's suddenly a lot more interesting. Right? Yeah.
Well, we used to write them in Objective-C.
Yeah. Or in Ruby.
For your, I have two. Of course, I have two non-questions. One around Xcode 5, there was a whole plugin structure for Xcode, where you could also have menu items and user interfaces and stuff like that to make code generators as well. And my question to you is, there's no UI possible with Xcode or Swift Package Manager plugins. You cannot make a dialog where you can configure stuff, or can you?
I'm not sure, but this is the UI that I know of.
Well, it's a UI.
And,
so you have to make arguments and stuff. So there is a UI, and it's very.
But maybe I don't know if you could actually trigger a pop-up. Maybe I haven't tried that. It would be interesting to try. So here, this is the right-click one. This is not a build tool plugin, but a commands plugin, and this actually does run code.
Mm-hmm.
So in this example, I run our Swift on each target that the user selected. So maybe instead this is actually running the executable. So if this executable would pop up a UI, then maybe you could actually do that. Yes.
Cool.
Unless Apple blocks it. All these plugins run in sandboxes, which you can only do. I don't know if you can access the internet. Probably not. And you can only access your. Maybe I'm not sure. Maybe the command thing can do more than the build thing. So yeah, you can play around with this.
Yeah, interesting. Until Apple kills it, of course. But that's you never know that, because there were hundreds of plugins for Xcode, and then suddenly Apple says, no.
Also plugins to filter out your log output, right?
Log output, mock generator, stuff like that.
Hello. Is it working? I'm curious about if these plugin things are only in Xcode or works with VS Code as well. I sometimes make command line tools in Swift in VS Code for Linux, but does it work?
So this project is a pure Swift Package Manager project, so this you can also run from the command line. And then they also run, so it's not Xcode dependent. I think the name is Swift. It's part of Swift Package Manager, not part of Xcode. So you can run them on the command line, and the command plugins. So I have four plugins. These two are build tool plugins, but the command plugin actually has a name, a verb, which you use from the command line, and the description you can see on the command line. And this is the message that's shown on the command line as well, asking for permissions. So any place Swift Package Manager and Swift can be run, these can also be run.
Okay, thank you.
Gradle plugins in Android support incremental compilation. So basically, for example, the Android Gradle plugin, if you don't change your resources, it's not going to regenerate the R files. Do these kind of plugins also support caching, so that if you don't change your resources, it's not going to regenerate all the
I think so, but I haven't tried it and not sure yet. Here you can see this run script build phase will be run during every build because the option based on dependency is not checked, which is a user interface option that's not available. So I think this message is old. But you can configure input and output files. And I think if none of the input files have changed and nobody depends on any of the output files, then the plugin won't run. Which, at least that's the way it used to work in Xcode only before this version, before Swift Package Manager. So I think, I don't know if it's currently working, but that's the way it's intended to work, that it only compiles, runs when needed.
Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you.